find ourselves at a pretty historic moment, and I think it is important to show how all of these issues that have just been raised do translate into a global narrative. As Dominic pointed out, as we speak right now, the preparations for the G7 meeting in Cornwall are well underway, and Joe Biden will shortly arrive in Europe for his first trip as president. Biden stands for a progressive agenda that goes much further than a linear continuation of the Obama era, and he's coming to Europe with a very clear message. Here in Europe, this message is consistently framed as trying to marshal support for his policies on China. But this framing misses a significant part of the picture. His approach is not about a new Cold War struggle of defending US supremacy against China's rise. It is not about keeping China down to preserve US dominance, but it is about actively shaping a world in which we still have the option to do so, to actually shape. And I think it's about a new approach that takes the fact that China is so significantly changing the game across the entirety of policy areas that takes that actually seriously. As Jake Sullivan and Jennifer Harris from the US National Security Council put it nicely before taking office, US foreign policymakers now face a world in which power is increasingly measured and exercised in economic terms, where authoritarian capitalism is challenging market democracy as the prevailing model. And they acknowledge that this shift in grand strategy necessitates a rethink of economic philosophy that has thus far driven US policy. And I think it's precisely in this context that the framing of Biden just trying to get Europe on board on China is missing how much of an opportunity the current dynamic presents for Europe and for a progressive agenda. An agenda that transcends the traditional idea of the West and forges new global coalitions. The fact that Australia, India, South Korea, and South Africa have been invited as guests to the G7 meeting being a case in point here. So let me make the case in 3 minutes why it is right to refract our thinking through the challenges that Xi Jinping's version of China poses on tech, on climate, on prosperity, and therefore also on the resilience of democracy. And why only a positive, non-defensive agenda that embraces change and protects the possibility of progress will be able to tackle this new reality of a China that is now clearly set on disintegrating from global markets and standards, focused on setting its own terms of how the world economy should deliver for China. So on tech, there's already this illusion of China's unbeatable market power, that scale and the amount of data will provide it with the edge to lead the digital transformation. China is still very far away from where it would need to be autonomous in this area. And this provides the US and Europe with leverage. If pursued jointly or in a coordinated way, we still have and will continue to be able to provide competitive solutions. But we need to invest in standard setting, gaining global market shares through digital connectivity, in joint R&D and smart industrial policy. The best case scenario on issues like 5 or 6G are global standards. The worst case scenario is a fragmentation of the democratic tech powers. This is how we lose the scale we need to compete and shape the digital future in a democratic and inclusive way. On climate, it will mean to actively embrace the competitive dynamics of the decarbonization logic that is now entering the markets and to shape the standards by which this is happening. It is key to forge coalitions with banks and investors, spend on renewable energy solutions globally by providing fiscal space in climate vulnerable countries and seizing this as an active part of the development agenda. It also means breaking down traditional interinstitutional barriers and stop being shy about connecting industrial policy and a development agenda that supports the green transition. And finally, on prosperity, it will mean to retell the story of wealth creation in a post-neoliberal world. This will include reining in the worst instincts of our own companies doing business in China, while actively spending political capital and creating alternative markets in key growth regions of the Indo-Pacific. There is a clear realization, even in the conservative chambers of the German industry, that it's impossible for the market and companies to take care of the imbalances that state-backed Chinese competitors create. That the challenge is structural and will require a structural, not a market response. And this provides space for progressive ideas and a perceptive ground for a positive role of government in creating a more level playing field globally for long-term prosperity and job security at home. We will not have the luxury to figure out our own post-COVID recovery, digital and green transformation in isolation from this larger challenge. We have to do sort of both things simultaneously and seize the opportunity that China presents us with of reshaping the way we approach politics and economics. The logic is not to win a new Cold War, but to use the current momentum to build a better world that delivers for all and not just for China and some big companies. So I think it kind of, this element of the conversation really ties in nicely with the what do we do on the national level, really translates well to the kind of global level as well. I sit in Berlin, and I can tell you this is kind of a waiting period that we're having at the moment. So what's going to come in the fall? What is going to happen next? And I see a problem in this kind of being not in sync, that the Biden administration needs to deliver also at home on this agenda, on this global approach, on a multilateral approach, on taking the allies on board, and that it is becoming slightly difficult at the moment because there is a kind of hedginess in Paris, in Berlin. I think we've seen that in the multiple speeches that we've been hearing since the Biden administration has been in office, that they're not entirely sure whether they are fully going to buy into this, whether there is going to be a real new coalition to be built at the moment. And this hesitance can have a detrimental effect on what is actually on kind of dampening the opportunities that are actually there in this huge window of opportunity where the sameness of the analytical challenge that we're facing, we agree on what the problems are very much at the moment. And the change that has happened in the United States that is actually bringing it so much closer to European positions on data privacy, on trade questions. There's a lot more similarities now, but there's a risk that they fall by the wayside in our own hesitance on what may come in 3.5 years, whether there is going to be a next Trump on the horizon. And I think what the challenge for us is right now to understand that we have to seize these next 3.5 years, 3.5 years that we have as good as we can, because it's not there. The global challenge that we're going to see on the bigger stage is going to move with the same speed that it has in the past. And that's going to create even bigger challenges. So losing this momentum, losing this window of opportunity will not leave us in a better place in 4 years' time, come what may in the US elections then. So I think at the moment, from a Berlin perspective, it is obviously that there is a great degree of skepticism when it comes to the developments in China, but there is no kind of willingness to buy into a decoupling agenda. There's no willingness to say, to go into an adversarial mode, because there is a lot of economic interest and there's a lot of jobs tied to this. There is a lot of kind of the idea of how our progress and how our future should look like from the current German government is very much tied to the China experience. So this is definitely dampening some of the expectations. The data questions are, I think, they are real, but they can also be overcome. I think we have a number of issues that we're also kind of blowing up out of proportion a bit in terms of how big of a problem they could actually be if we were to sit down and negotiate about them. The trade question is going to be an issue. I think there are a lot of offers being made by the US at the moment in terms of the use of economic coercion and the use of weaponization of its own economy, the use of sanctions to actually extend a hand to the Europeans. But there's reluctance on issues like defense spending, on Nord Stream 2. I mean, we know the issues. They've been there for so long. I do think it's important, though, to transcend that and to look at the larger challenge that we're facing for the years to come.